One morning, a thought crossed my mind that surprised me. It said, I need to slow down. It was strange because the thought seemed to come out of nowhere. That evening after work and another day of feeling frazzled, burned out, and scared of impending but unidentified doom, I sat with my partner discussing the workday, and another thought crossed my mind that surprised me. I can't do this anymore, it said, and this time it made me start to cry. My partner quickly asked me what was wrong, and I said it out loud. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I thought I was going crazy, but this was the exact moment that got me to take sick leave and to start reclaiming myself. If you can relate to this on any level, even if it's not about work, the I can't do this anymore moment, this episode is for you. You are listening to the Midlife Plot Twist podcast, and this is episode 24. Hi everyone, how are we doing this week? I hope you're doing well and that the week is off to a good start. In last week's episode, I introduced a 5-part series on midlife reclamation, in which I'm asking and exploring what it means to reclaim ourselves or parts of ourselves in midlife that we lost or set aside. For the next 5 episodes, we're going deep on something I've been working on for a while, but I'm still just getting started with, and that's midlife reclamation. I'm looking at what it means to get yourself back. The opening scene for today's episode is a little snippet of my story, the beginning of me realizing that I needed to take some time off work, which was ultimately the thing that led to me overhauling my priorities, learning about the importance of rest, and listening to my needs and my body. Have you ever had this experience where you just realized, I can't do this anymore? I've had this happen most recently with work, but I've also had this happen in other contexts before. I had this sort of epiphany moment at the end of a long-term relationship as well. I was in the middle of a couples counseling session and blurted out in the middle, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to work on this anymore. And that was effectively the end of that relationship. This little sentence, I can't do this anymore, can pop up or pop out of us from nowhere or seemingly nowhere. Have you had this experience? Maybe you feel that you're on the verge of your own version of this. So, what led to this moment of clarity? It had been a long buildup of things. I was dealing with burnout and COVID concurrently. What was that like? I experienced exhaustion, not just tiredness, but fatigue in my very soul. That sounds dramatic, but I don't know how else to convey the depth of fatigue I felt. It was exhaustion that sleep could not and did not fix. I was also on complete autopilot. I felt like I was just performing my life. I definitely was not living it. My body was going about all the motions of the day, the activities that I had to go through, but there was no pilot present. It was also filled with resentment. Whereas I once loved my job, felt deep satisfaction, excitement, pride, and fulfillment, I now felt like it was ruining my life. No, I felt like it was ruining me. I started to feel that my colleagues were against me. Every day felt like the next was just around the corner, meaning that on Tuesday morning, I was already fearing Wednesday afternoon. Sleep was either also not happening, or I'd wake up in the middle of the night and be awake for a couple of hours before falling back to sleep, and boop, it's time to wake up again the next day. I also felt guilty that I was suffering as I was because on the outside everything looked good and that I had so much to be thankful for. And I also started questioning, is this it? Like, am I going to spend the rest of my life like this? And if so, what's it for? What does this mean? What is my purpose? All this was going on in my early to mid 40s. It was a slow build up over several years, during which time I also lost both of my parents, a best friend, my uterus, and had a cancer scare. It was a lot. But I want to emphasize that based on the women whom I've spoken with, that the "I can't do this anymore" statement is something that commonly happens in our 40s. And why is that? Well, I think there's enough research out there on midlife to feel confident in knowing that midlife is a genuine psychological transition point. And I'm not just talking about hormones here. I am talking about a psychological transition point where we're dealing with identity shifts too. We also have the effect of accumulating needs piled up that we've abandoned over the past few decades for productivity and caregiving. Then there are the shifts in our roles as our kids get older, if we have them, as our career starts to plateau or to pivot, and as our parents age. Also, as we witness signs of aging in our own bodies and ourselves. And the last one I'll mention is that I think many of us start to recognize that we've spent more time people-pleasing than exploring who we are, what we need, and what we truly want. All of this is not to point out ways in which we've failed ourselves or to be anything critical. Rather, it's to give some context that we're in a developmental turning point here, a developmental transition point, not a realization of failures or shortcomings. I had a crisis moment, so I'm going to be speaking from my experience from that point of view and talk about my version of a midlife crisis. Not everyone will have this crisis moment, though. It might just be a slow, steady progression for you. Regardless, I'd like to reframe the midlife crisis or midlife transitions for women as a signal, or as my podcast is called, as a plot twist. It's a turning point in our story, and it's an important one for sure. Something in me knew that my life had drifted too far away from myself. I had worked very hard to get to where I was and to having what I had, and I was exhausted by it all. I remember when I started my career and I was so passionate about teaching. I felt like I could really make a difference through education about things that I believed mattered. I took my course preparation really seriously. My planning was open, inspired, and creative. I taught with enthusiasm and looked forward to feedback from students, to chatting with colleagues about things like pedagogy, and to build a human connection with students. Part of my wake-up call, part of what was in the statement, "I can't do this anymore," was that by that point, I would say things like, "I hate teaching." I resented and didn't trust the students anymore. In fact, I blamed them in my mind for ruining my career. Course prep became a task that I hated, and that caused me a huge amount of anxiety. I share this to say that not only was I becoming that deep soul level exhausted, I was also starting to resent everything about my career, the one that I had worked so hard for. I truly thought I was going crazy. It took me a long time to realize that the part of me that was exhausted isn't broken. I had been working overtime, running a life that was built for someone else. I was living a life that no longer fit my current self. I was living a life that a past version of myself wanted, but now in midlife I started to want more and different. I'll share that the "I can't do this anymore" moment is a great one, actually, because it leads to it leads to some fear of the unknown, yes, but it also leads to action. The next day, I emailed my employer and said that I would be taking sick leave, and I went to see my doctor. Prior to that moment, the thought would never have crossed my mind to take sick leave. I only fantasized about being hospitalized so that I could take a break. And with that, I'd like to give you a bit of a roadmap for the series coming up, this series of Midlife Reclamation. In this episode, I wanted just to spark some thought about when something feels broken and like you can't do it anymore. I want to emphasize that you're not going crazy. I want to normalize that in midlife it seems to be pretty common to start having shifts and changes to get into life transition mode, and that this does not necessarily have to mean crisis. You're not going crazy for wanting more or wanting differently than you did in your 20s or 30s. It's natural to change and to grow. If there's one thing I hope for you to take away from this short episode today, it's that. I'm going to transition now into our next episode for next week. In the next episode, I'm going to be asking you what you buried in order to accomplish or to survive in your 30s and your 20s, and reflect on what it means to lose parts of ourselves. Then in episode 3 of the series, we're going to talk about what it means to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be. In episode 4, we're looking at rebuilding and redesigning a life around who you actually are. This is the action of reclaiming those parts that we lost and planning around that. And finally, in the 5th episode, we're going to think about our new normal, where we live a reclaimed life. I hope this sounds interesting to you, and that it might help in some way. I'll leave you with a question to sit with before next Monday's episode, and that is, when was the last time you made a decision based on what you truly wanted, not what you thought was expected, needed, or responsible? Just notice what comes up, and we'll start there. And with that, I will say that's all for today's short episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, please follow the show on whatever platform you're using to listen, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Podbean or wherever. Also, come and find me on my new account on Threads. It's under the same handle as everywhere else. It's Midlife Plot Twist Podcast. And come follow me on Instagram. The account is Midlife Plot Twist Podcast. And if you would like, you can always email me. My email is midlifeplottwistpodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, be well.